Forcing your way to happiness and miracles, it just doesn't work. It depletes you, it disconnects you, it drowns out all that quiet wisdom that's just trying to reach you. And what I know is that sometimes the real breakthrough doesn't come from doing more, it comes from actually doing less and listening. So here's an example of what I mean. You know those aha moments? They seem to just drop in out of the blue, or that great idea that you get when you're taking a shower. Some of my best ideas have come from the shower. Well, that's the power of the pause. Epiphanies usually don't show up when you're pushing or striving. They come when you stop and you take a break. So think about it. When do your best insights come? Are they mid-scrolling, or in the middle of a meeting, or in the middle of a meltdown? Probably not. They come when you're out for a quiet walk, or you're just sitting in stillness, or you're just focusing on something other than the problem that you're trying to solve. In fact, Einstein said that his best ideas came to him when he was just out for a walk. Now, if you don't know me, I'm Marci Shimoff. I'm the author of Happy for No Reason and Chicken Soup for the Woman's Soul, and I'm a featured teacher in the movie The Secret. And I want to share with you a story of the power of this pause that really had a huge impact on my life. Now, it started when I was 13. I went to see Zig Ziglar, who is an inspirational speaker. And as he was walking across the stage, I got this clear vision that that's what I was supposed to do for my life. I was going to travel around the world, speaking to large audiences and inspiring people. But when I started my career, I actually had a lot of self-doubt. And in 1989, I decided to get trained in teaching self-esteem training. There's a saying, you teach what you most want to learn. Well, I wanted to raise my self-esteem. So I asked around, who's the best person to learn this from? And the answer kept coming back to me, Jack Canfield. And this was before he even had thought of the Chicken Soup for the Soul books yet. He was teaching self-esteem. I took his training and I started teaching workshops on self-esteem. And I worked really, really, really hard to build my career. I used to call myself a road warrior. I would go from city to city to city every day. I would speak for 8 hours in high heels back then. And I would then get in the car and drive 4 hours to the next city and do the talk again. I would speak to audiences, maybe 20 people in the room, maybe 50 on a great day, maybe 100. It certainly was not those big audiences that I had seen in my early vision. And I was struggling and I was exhausted. I knew that I was doing the right kind of work, but I felt like I was just hitting my head against the wall, trying to make it happen. Well, in January of 1995, a dear friend of mine came to me and she said, Marci, you're burned out. You need a break. She said, come with me on a 7-day silent meditation retreat. And I looked at her and I said, are you crazy? I don't do silence. But she was very, very persuasive, and off we went. Well, let me tell you, those first couple of days were torture. I couldn't settle down, but finally I really did settle in and I started letting go of that pushing and that driving energy that I'd lived in. And I just surrendered to the pause. And on the 4th day, in the middle of a meditation, a light bulb went off in my head and I saw the words, Chicken Soup for the Woman's Soul. Now, at the time, there were no other Chicken Soup for the Soul books except the original one, and nobody had thought of these specialty books. And I knew as soon as that image came to me, that's exactly what I was supposed to be doing and what would lead me to those big audiences that I had visioned. There was just one problem. I just had this huge epiphany and I still had 3 more days of silence and I couldn't tell anybody. But as soon as the retreat was over, I ran to the closest payphone. We didn't have cell phones back then. And I called up Jack Canfield and I told him my idea and he said, oh my God, I can't believe nobody's thought of it. He called up the publisher who said, I can't believe nobody's thought of it. And within a month or so, I started working on the book. And a year and a half later, Chicken Soup for the Woman's Soul came out. And it went to #1 on the New York Times bestseller list that very first week. And it was that thing that propelled me to that vision that I had of speaking to large audiences around the world. And since then, I've written 9 books. They've been on the New York Times bestseller list for 121 weeks. They've sold more than 16 million copies. And I tell you, I never could have planned for that. That's how powerful the pause was for me. There are 3 key shifts that you can lean into for the power of the pause. The 3rd shift is one that I know is going to really affect you because it affects almost all of us. So the first shift is that rest is not laziness. Somewhere along the way, we were taught that if you rest, you're lazy. I know I was taught that. I often felt guilty if I wasn't just really pushing. There's always someone or something that I need to take care of. I think women get that particular one especially stronger. There's somebody to take care of, whether it's the partner or children or parents or a community or your business. And then taking care of ourselves usually ends up last on the list. Rest, it's not a luxury. It is a necessity for living a miraculous life. If you look at nature, all of nature has cycles of rest and activity. And our bodies, we are nature, and we need those same cycles of rest and activity. We need the rejuvenation that comes from rest. I remember that I used to feel so guilty taking breaks. And at one point, I was working so hard that one of my doctors, he was an Ayurvedic doctor, and he said to me, "Marci, you are burned out and you have to stop right now." And I said, "Well, I don't have time to stop right now. I'll rest in a couple of years once I get through all of this work." And he said, No. It will be too late by then. You'll lose too much of your body's prana. And your body's prana is your vital energy and your life force. He said, you must take care of yourself now. Well, that really kind of freaked me out. And so I did take a break and I started doing the things he was telling me to do in terms of rest. I made quantity and the quality of my sleep a priority. Most nights I get to bed by 10 o'clock. I call it catching the 10 o'clock angel train. And I found that I, not only started to feel better during the day, but I was happier and I was getting more done. I think that rest is not selfish. It is sacred. And we can really return to our best, truest selves when we have rested properly. So think of it as sacred rest. Now, the second shift is that sacred space that creates clarity. So this is, I imagine you've had a situation where you had to make a big decision. And the more you mulled it over in your mind, the more you just got stuck in your head trying to figure out what to do. And it can drive you crazy. And the answer usually doesn't come from trying to figure it out. Let me figure it out. But when you allow just some spaciousness in your day, you open a doorway for something higher, I think, something that is beyond the rational mind to come to you. And that's where those best ideas come from. The clarity lands not from that trying to make it happen in our head, not from forcing it, but from making room for it to appear. And that's what happened for me at that silent meditation retreat. Here's the good news about this. You do not have to go away for 7 days of silence in order to create sacred space for yourself. So what I found is that even just 5 minutes a day where you're silent can really help you access greater clarity. Now, the third shift, this one is good for everybody. And that is when you do less, you can actually feel more. When you pause the doing, you reconnect with the being. And the being is where you're more in touch. You notice more, you become more present. When we stop racing through our lives, we can finally experience our lives. And my partner, my husband, Sergio, is originally from Italy. And I was sharing this idea with him a few years ago. And he taught me this beautiful Italian phrase. Everything sounds better in Italian, And the phrase he taught me was dolce far niente. And literally it means sweet do nothing. The sweet do nothing. It's the celebration of relaxing. Being stuck in that busyness doesn't leave us time to connect with our innate essence or the appreciation of who we really are inside, and we can miss some of those sweetest parts of life. So, by really doing less, by honoring dolce far niente, you leave time for more of that yumminess, I call it, of life, that deliciousness. And so I invite you this week to give yourself permission to just ease up on the forcing and I'll start allowing. So I'm going to end with a great quote from Annie Lamott, who said, "Almost everything will work again if you unplug it for a few minutes, including you." So let me know in the comments, what is it that you would like to pause from, or what would it look like for you this week to rest without guilt? Your next great idea, your next epiphany isn't in the push. It is in the pause.